everyone, it's our second episode of HR Show and Tell. I'm your host, Michelle Berg of Elevated HR, and today's guest is Saira of HRology. She happens to be a licensed investigator with the Alberta General Solicitor, and we chat all things investigations. The truth is, both of our businesses were affected positively as it related to the pandemic and our investigative work, not something you hear about every day. Saira gives us her advice on why organizations need to ensure a solid plan is in place prior to beginning an investigation. We talk cancel culture, and she also gives us some tips on why empathy is the key behavioral trait of a great investigator. If you attended live but had to leave, there are some great questions at the end you may even want to skip to. Either way, it all begins right now. Okay.
I grew up at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I literally spent close to 14 years of my life there. That's where I learned everything that I learned about human resources outside of school. The CBC taught me work habits. It taught me the value of collaboration. It taught me how to build relationships on both sides of the table, both with internal leadership in the CBC and with my union counterparts. And I can honestly say that at times, my relationship with the union was stronger than my relationships within the organization. When I worked at CBC, I had so many opportunities to learn and grow and develop and to take on some very challenging workplace investigations. And that's where I really developed my love and passion for that type of work.
And so then moving though, again, recognizing that there might be some outside influences to make your decisions to move to Calgary. Love. Yeah. That's really what brought you here, because I don't think you were loving the weather when you first got here. I remember multiple conversations about that. But on the flip side of that, what made you believe that, hey, I'm just going to take this jump and become a consultant? Because it is there. I think there are a couple of other consultants that are attendees today. What did you know inside you, or what was it really that pushed you to do that rather than try to find something internal here?
So, it's kind of a funny story because I kind of fell into consulting by accident.
Right.
The reality is that I did move to Calgary for love, and he is 100% worth it. But I was leaving my family, and I'm very close to my family. And so for me to make the transition from moving from Toronto to Calgary, I wanted to do it slowly. And I wanted to do it in a way that worked for me, both like with my family and personally, but also professionally. And at that time, it wasn't the norm that we were working remotely for a lot of different organizations. So I fell into it a little bit. I sought some advice from some very close mentors, and they were doing the independent thing. And they said, hey, you should try it out for a few months while you make the transition from moving from Toronto to Calgary and see how you like it. And so I tried it, and it was hard. I did align myself with some consulting firms because I had never done sales before or business development. And that was very daunting to me. And so I fell into it, but I quickly found that I loved it. And I loved the flexibility. I loved the fact that I got to work with small and medium-sized businesses without 200 levels of approval, that you could add value instantly. And I think I built my confidence over time because after having worked for such a large organization, I wasn't sure if I could apply some of those big learnings and big business sort of culture. I wasn't sure if I could apply it to smaller businesses. And I found out that, you easily can.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you say that, because people that have come through Elevated, because we hire you, you're not a consultant when you come in through Elevated. Typically, you come in as an employee. We do notice though that there is a struggle coming from that big business mindset, coming into small businesses, recognizing how agile they are and how flexible that you have to be. But you're right. I think that HR is HR as long as you're willing to jump in and when you're a consultant anyways, I find, it doesn't mean whether it's putting something up in a system and scanning something, sometimes that's still our role. I mean, I think a lot of people think that consulting is this beautiful strategy and we just get to impart all our theory and all our knowledge, but realistically, it can be
we got to do it all.
Yeah.
We got to do it all. Yeah.
And admittedly too, like I'm not good at the business development either. I'm not good at the sales. It is that, like, as an HR person, that has to be, it is the scariest part. And therefore that's why I brought someone on my team now who does that. Like follow up, what's follow up, CRM system. So it is hard. It's certainly hard. And I think though too, when, there are days too where and I think some of my team is on here, but there are days where I think, this might be easier just as a one-person show. But I do love the team and the team aspect that we have and that we've been able to grow and the culture we've been able to build too. But coming back to you, is there anything that you miss about internal then, like being on the internal side? Because I agree with all the strengths that a consultant life brings, or the great things, the great benefits, but what do you miss about internal?
So, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't miss anything about being internal, because even though I'm primarily a workplace investigator and that is the bread and butter of my business, I still sometimes work internally with clients. I still act as their outsourced HR in some regards. And so I don't feel like I miss that opportunity to build partnership and to add value. Like, I still feel like I have the best of both worlds. I just tend to, spend most of my time in the workplace investigation side.
Okay. All right. Now let's jump into the place where everybody wants us to go.
Okay.
Investigations and workplace respect.
Okay.
So admittedly, 2020 for us, I mean, we've kind of dabbled in the place. We've seen some things. We do, we've been here. I would have said, yeah, we do that. But 2020 for us saw an entirely different uptick of asking us to do investigations, being part of even just support systems. Sometimes for both the complainant and the respondents need support systems in place too. So we'd be asked to even help them identify that, to come in and do workplace respect training. That was also massive for us in 2020. It became like this new thing. Did you notice that for your business too, or was it pretty steady because that is the work that you kind of focused on?
So I will say that 2020, I felt like it was very steady. The first 2 months of the pandemic, I was freaking out of it because I wasn't super, super busy with investigations. But I think that's because, organizations were trying to figure out how to adjust to the new normal, and they weren't really focused on, addressing those types of issues. But I would say 2020 overall was really steady for me. There were peaks for sure. There were lots of times where I would get like requests for like 3 or 4 investigations in a week. And I just didn't have the capacity to take every single one of them on. I will say that in 2020, I didn't actually do any workplace respect training, and that has typically been part of the offering that I provide, but I didn't do any of it. I did only investigations. I didn't do any remote workplace respect training in 2020.
Is that because one that you didn't need to, or you were just so busy with the investigations that couldn't be that follow-up piece that you could do?
So usually when I do workplace respect trainings, I don't do the training in the same organization that I do an investigation for, because I like to maintain that neutrality and that independence. If people see me like training and interacting with people in the organization, it looks like, whether it's true or not, it looks like I'm developing relationships. It looks like I'm establishing rapport. And so I wouldn't be seen as independent anymore.
Yeah.
That said, so normally when I do workplace respect training, it's not for an organization that I've done investigations for, or I haven't done an investigation for them for a couple of years now. The real reason I didn't do any workplace respect training in 2020 was I didn't get any requests for it. I got a lot of requests for investigations, but I didn't get any requests for workplace training, workplace respect training.
Okay, so this kind of like folds into like a really good next question, or a good segue, because I know that there's a lot of HR professionals that are here with us today or will be listening, and they do both investigations themselves, plus they'll follow up with the workplace respect. What's the difference in your mind between an internal investigator and someone who comes in external, and would you do one over the other? I mean, obviously we both run businesses, but I would love to, know your thoughts on what happens on an internal investigation that might be different than external.
So, I mean, I've been an internal investigator. I did lots of, workplace investigations when I worked at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. But one of the things we really tried to do when I was an internal investigator is still to remain sort of neutral, unbiased, and independent. And so what that would mean is I wouldn't necessarily do workplace investigations in my own client group, or my own internal client group, or even in the same city that I worked and lived in, because it was seen as though I had relationships with people. And when you have relationships with people, it's easy for other people to assume that you also have agendas or you're aligned with people. And so when I did work as an internal investigator, when I was assigned to do a workplace investigation, oftentimes it was outside of my own client group where I didn't know people and I didn't have relationships, or it was in a totally different city. I think that it's very different working as an external investigator. Oftentimes, I will go into organizations as an independent investigator, and I will have never met anyone in that organization before, except for the key stakeholder who has engaged me, whether it's the director of HR or the CEO or the CFO, whoever engages me. That's usually the only point of contact that I've had in that organization. So I don't know the past history. I don't know if there's been any dramas of the past. I don't have an agenda. I don't have an objective to come to a conclusion that is aligned with one person's view or another. I'm really going in blind. And one of the things that I do to ensure that neutrality is when I am going through the discussion phase with a key stakeholder to figure out if I'm the right investigator for them, I will ask questions about what's the name of the complainant, what is the name of the respondent, who are some of the key witnesses, are if some of them have a union representative or they're being represented by a lawyer. I like to ask these questions so I can identify early if there's any real or like known or perceived potential conflict of interest. And if there is, like if I have a relationship like with a union rep or a lawyer, I will say that, look, this isn't going to be seen as unbiased, fair, or neutral. So there's no point in using me.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally get that. Okay. So help us understand, a lot of times investigators are just, they're not necessarily licensed, and it's not um, that you have to be licensed in order
Right.
to do an investigation either. Like lots of lawyers often do investigations as well. They're not licensed. And actually, we were doing a workplace respect training not too long ago. And one of the questions actually came up is, well, how do you know then if someone, like if a lawyer or an HR person that's not licensed, how do you know that they're actually trained or can do an investigation? And, I remember, I was kind of taken aback at that. Well, you just know, like, anyways, like it, or you have to trust. And again, like, oh man, this is why people don't report, because they don't necessarily trust the process. We haven't explained it, but no one had ever asked it in such a pointed, I guess, a pointed way. But anyways, coming back to you, because I am going off on a tangent, coming back to you, you chose to get licensed. What was the precipice behind that?
So, okay, so there is no requirement to be licensed. But when you niche down in your business, and my company of one,
Right.
it is the work that I do. It is the work that I'm most passionate about. It is the work that I want to be doing and want to be known for. So for me, it's a credibility piece. Um, when I grew up at the CBC, that's where I learned how to conduct a good workplace investigation, right? Like I had good people to show me, I had people to shadow, I went through formal training, I had support as I was doing my first few, and then I was really comfortable in doing them on my own. But if I've chosen to niche down on my business and really make this the focus of my practice, then it's important that I have as many credentials as I can to support the fact that I am qualified, that I am a competent investigator. And so the real only way to go through this process is the licensing process through the Alberta Solicitor General. And it isn't just about workplace investigations, it's about all investigations. It's learning how to conduct a proper investigation. So there's some things I learned around, surveillance and stuff that I will never use because that is not the focus of my business. My business is workplace investigations. But the real reason I also decided to get licensed is because many of the companies that employ me, or I often get employed by lawyers, law firms who ask me to conduct an investigation for their client. They might be representing their client on some other issue, and they want an independent investigator to go in and do the workplace investigation part of their issue. Lawyers like people who are licensed because we are bound by a code of conduct, right? I have a licensing requirement that, everybody's required to follow the letter of the law and, follow legislation, but it's built into my code of conduct that I'm going to be confidential in the way that I handle investigations, that I'm going to follow the letter of the law, and I am bound by a code of conduct. So it gives lawyers, comfort when you've gone through this licensing process. I don't think you can go through the licensing process not having ever done an HR investigation before, like a workplace investigation before, and come out of that licensing process feeling like you're equipped to do a workplace investigation. You need both. You need both the specific training on how to conduct a workplace investigation. You need the experience. You need strong mentorship and support as you work through and navigate your first few investigations. And then the licensing process helps to establish and cement credibility.
Right. Okay. And what was the time commitment? Just other people might be interested in doing it in their own organization, or is it needed? If you're an internal HR, would you say it's still needed to get a license? Would you promote it? What does that look like? Not that I want to take away from your business, but
no,
again,
not at all.
We're sharing and telling, right?
And also we say we value, collaboration over competition, and that's true. Yeah. As an internal investigator, I never considered going through a licensing process. And actually the licensing process is very specific to Alberta. I hadn't heard of the same licensing process when I lived and worked in Ontario. I don't think it's essential, but I do think that for someone like me, who is an independent external investigator, it certainly doesn't hurt. It gives me more opportunities. And in terms of the time commitment, it's not significant. I did it through an online course, which I did in my own time. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of material to read and cover. And then I did a licensing exam, mm-hmm. which took maybe an hour and a half. Right. And then actually, I think the studying and the exam is easier than submitting the actual paperwork that's required in order to get your license, because you have to submit everything. You need to right. Get it all in order and submit it. It's quite an undertaking, I would say, but I'm pleased that I got it. And good. And I, if anyone is especially considering doing niching down and doing this as the focus of their business, I don't think that it hurts in any way. I think it's been very helpful, and it has really changed the opportunities that I've had access to in my practice.
Awesome. So let's go back to the organizations. What do you think, or what's the one piece of advice that when an organization is trying to set up an investigation, or maybe it's what they're failing to even understand, what do you see is is there a commonality between organizations that don't necessarily get it right in the beginning, or maybe there's some missteps here and there? What would you say that would be if there was an advice or the thing you see that you wish that people would stop doing? Do you have something like that?
I think the most important thing for organizations is to do everything that they can to get it right the first time.
Right.
And so what does that mean, right? So for me, there's a number of core values when you're conducting investigations, but the most important thing is the competency of the investigator. So someone who has been trained in and has experience doing investigations. Because if the person who's leading the process is not experienced and has never done one before and doesn't have a strong mentor to guide them through the process, that's where mistakes and mishaps can occur. And it can compromise the integrity of the investigation. And the thing is investigations are so important to get right. And they're important to get right because A, it's the law. The law says that organizations, if they know that there is, or if they find out that there is a potential problem in their organization, the most significant obligation that an employer has is to their employees is to create a healthy and safe workplace for their employees. Right. And it's not okay to say, I didn't know this was going on, because the law and the courts have said, well, shame on you, you should have known. You have an obligation to know, you have an obligation to address, you have an obligation to address it swiftly, and you have an obligation to address it correctly. And so it's really important. So the law says you have to do it. There are ramifications if you do it poorly or you do it badly. And that is anything from fines to reputational damage to court awarded damages. And third, like morally, you're trying to build trust with your employees. They're watching you carefully, how you handle these types of situations. So from a moral obligation perspective, a building culture, building trust, we have to get these things right. So that's why it's so important that organizations get them right. And so competency of the investigator is really important because they are driving the process. And then secondly, on top of competency of the investigator, I would say the duty of fairness is the thing that is compromised so often. Organizations don't always appoint an investigator that is seen as neutral, unbiased, and fair. I've been called in to do investigations where someone's best friend conducted the investigation. So their best friend at work was in charge of leading the investigation. No matter how hard that person works to remain neutral, fair, and unbiased, they're never going to be seen as neutral, fair, or unbiased by any of the parties. So it's really important, fairness, not just about the investigator, but also how do you treat the parties? There's a complainant who's filed a complaint, and there's a respondent, or there's multiple complainants and there's multiple respondents. And you need to treat them both fairly. The respondent needs to get a full and fair opportunity to address any and all allegations and evidence against them, right? They have to have that full and fair opportunity. They're both your employees. You have to offer them both support. They're both humans. They both need to be treated with respect, empathy, and compassion through this very difficult process. So I would say that my advice is it's important to get it right.
Yeah.
Really,
the
really.
first time.
Yeah, the first time.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, in 2020, that's actually what we saw. We would see a bunch of internal investigations were started off. They would be done first. And then that's exactly it, that, the whatever the outcomes would be, whether it was the respondent or the complainant, both didn't see eye to eye with that. But because it was done internally, they then had to come in and what I would call redo the investigation.
Right.
That's really what it led to, because there was a bias or there was a conflict of interest that wasn't disclosed early on in the relationship or in the investigation.
Right.
So we saw a lot of that, and it felt, I'm even going to say, like, it felt icky, because I believe there are a lot of great HR practitioners that are out there that are doing what it is that they need to do, but coming in and having to redo work it was not my favorite. Let's just say that. Did you see that uptick this year, or is it kind of, it is what it is and it kind of stayed steady throughout?
It's been fairly steady, but I would say that when I'm called in to do a reinvestigation, those ones are hard because think about the time, effort, and energy that all the people have had to devote to this investigation. And no matter what, even if they invite someone who's independent and external to come in and redo the investigation, there's this grief that is already there. There's this broken piece of trust that's already there from the people who have participated. So I actually find those investigations even more layered and more challenging to undertake. And it's not that I don't take them on. It's that you have to do so much more work as the investigator to build that trust and build a relationship with every participant in that process, because they feel like their trust has already been broken, or they've already told somebody this story. Those can be very, very difficult and challenging situations.
Yeah, no, I agree. And to tell stories over and over again,
it's re-traumatizing.
Yeah, it is. And
right?
We have to recognize as investigators that in a way we are also contributing to that, continuing the trauma.
Absolutely.
So how do we do this in the least intrusive way while still being fair and impartial to the entire process? Because otherwise, if you don't, I
am a firm believer that an investigator does not have to be mean. Mm-hmm. Right? One of the things that I pride myself on, and I know that it's the reason why so many people have hired me, and it's also the reason why some people haven't. I pride myself on taking an empathetic approach, right? Regardless of who I'm meeting, regardless of what information and story they're sharing with me, I try and set them at ease. I am kind to them, because whether they've done something wrong intentionally or unintentionally, or whether they've done nothing wrong, they deserve kindness, they deserve compassion, they deserve understanding. And someone is always going to tell you more and be more open to answering your questions if you try and build that relationship with them. It doesn't mean that, like, when they say to me, wow, like, that wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be, it doesn't mean that I give people a break and that oh, she's so nice, she's never going to find me guilty of whatever I've been accused of. No, you can be kind, but you can be effective, and you can make tough calls and make hard decisions and come to factual findings. You can do all of those things. You just don't always have to be like a mean investigator. I firmly believe that.
Well, and you're probably right, but I'm going to sit here and own that I remember doing an investigation this summer, and the complainant looked at me and said, why am I the one on trial here? Like, why are you asking me these questions? And I remember like tapping into that empathy in that moment and going, oh, like that's not necessarily how I want you to feel. And then I had to come back and explain the process of like, I'm asking this question because I need to understand. I can't just take, your word at face value. I've got to, but, respecting the fact that that is how it feels. It did someone even change, and perhaps you've done this all along. I don't think I set it up in the beginning either as clearly that, what, this might feel a little tough at times. It might feel like I'm putting you, that you're feeling on the negative side, or you're going to be on the defense side. I think if I would have done a better job, but again, I guess it just wasn't part, we explained the confidentiality, we explained all of those things, but that piece wasn't probably as clear. And when she said that to me, I remember like my heart kind of crumbling inside. But at the same time, again, it comes down to intention and impact. And we talk about this, with the behaviors we're investigating, never mind just in how we're doing the investigation, and being conscious of, we do still have impact. And that's that trauma that can be repeated over and over again. It can be in the way that the questions are perceived. But the truth is, we have to be, again, there has to be that impartial, and the biases cannot be there for regardless of who it is. And I know I was just asked, we were just contacted to do another one that was pretty serious, and it was, as soon as I heard about it, I was taken back to a previous work experience where I had, and almost like I had like this, I won't call it PTSD moment, but I imagined myself in the way how I was feeling 15 years ago, or I guess it was 13 years ago in an environment I was in. Now we are being asked to investigate. I knew instantly I was not going to be able to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And even though we need the rep, nobody wants to say no to revenue anywhere. I knew I was not going to be able to compartmentalize and be an unbiased party in that space. When you and I started, you helped me out this summer, for example, and it was right around the time of George Floyd's death, and it was something to do with discrimination and racism. And you were also very vocal at that time. You were posting a lot and doing things like that. But I still asked you to get involved. Speaking of compartmentalization, how do you compartmentalize? Because I know I'm not like, that's actually the one thing that keeps me from being great at investigations, is I have a really hard time doing that. But you've been good at it. How do you do it?
So, I don't actually think that for me, I don't think I've been successful in being able to compartmentalize things.
Oh.
So when I do an investigation, I feel like I'm also living it. Not in the same traumatic ways that people are, but I'm not someone who finishes an investigation interview and can immediately be like, okay, my day is done, and I'm going to fix dinner and stuff. I'm always thinking about it. No matter what I'm doing, I'm thinking about it. I'm trying to understand, what other questions do I need to ask in order to find out what actually happened here. I am someone who I'm not able to just always sleep at night, especially when I've had a particularly difficult interview. I haven't been good at compartmentalizing it, but I do find that the process of me letting things marinate as I do other things helps me to understand, okay, here's my next step. Here's what I want to ask next. Here's what I need to explore more. As I reflect on, excuse me, as I reflect on the conversation, here are some of the other things that I think I need to get more details around. I will say that, you had asked me during the summer if the whole George Floyd Black Lives Matter issue had been more difficult for me than other investigations that I've done. And I think to some degree, whether it's harassment or bullying or racism or microaggressions or sexual assault or sexual harassment or whatever the issue might be, I still think I respond in the same way, which is it's still like it's got to be so traumatic for people, right? Like it's got to be so difficult and so challenging. And I just want to go back to what you were saying about when you're interviewing someone in that complainant who said, like, why do I feel like I'm on trial here or whatever.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly
Yeah,
what she said.
I mean, that is what they said. It wasn't a trial, obviously, but
No, of course. And my approach is always to, like, when I open an investigation, I say what my role is. And then when I'm getting to the point in the investigation where I'm going to be starting to ask questions that are about the specific event that was specifically traumatic, that's where I actually will say the next number of questions are going to be hard. It's going to be hard. And if you need time, if you need breaks, if you need a moment to collect yourself, if it's too much,
right.
You need to tell me and we will stop and we will take a beat, we will take a moment, or we will, resume another day. I'm not trying to re-traumatize you, but I do need to find out the answers to these questions in order for me to figure out what happened. And normally they're quite good. They're able to get through it and tell me their story and understand that even when they tell you their story once, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have to go back and ask more questions and ask them to tell the story again, because it's all part of the process. And it is a hard process for everybody.
Yeah. Do you see anyone like a psychologist or a mental health practitioner after you hear some of the stories that have come through, or what do you do to keep yourself safe?
So I haven't had to seek specialized support to deal with any of these issues yet. I haven't. I'm also not someone who easily forget. So I will always think about people and reflect. And that's one of the things about an external investigator is I don't always know, what the outcome was, or what was the restoration that took place, or how did they decide to navigate it? Because I'm an advisor and I can make recommendations, but I am not a decision maker. I would say that the things that have been most helpful for me to be able to move on is that bike, getting on that bike, even when I really, really don't want to. Working out has been something that has really, really helped to reframe my mind. I have great friends and family, and I have a very supportive and wonderful partner. And I think that those things all have helped me. But I will say that if I ever do an investigation that hits me somewhere that I'm finding a very difficult time moving on from, I would not hesitate to seek outside support. And I don't think there's any shame in that. And I can imagine that at some point I might need to do that.
Yeah. Well, I know for me and for many of you that know this, I talk about my own mental health journey quite often. And admittedly, like when we will get a complaint or something will come through. And I remember just one even just recently that I had to read through. So I knew I wasn't going to be the appointed investigator, but I read through the entire complaint because I was appointed as a support for the complainant, which I'll admit I actually really enjoyed that spot too. Bringing in a third party as a support, like you can bring in a psychologist, you can bring in a counselor, but sometimes it can feel better because I think there's an automatic thought that if you're HR internal, you're on the side of the organization as well. And the truth is, even though we are paid third party, we're still paid by the top. Our livelihood isn't as dependent, I think, on one individual project that we work on. It is spread, our risk is spread out. And so I think we come at it, at least I know our firm does, we come at it going, you know what, if you're going to ask us to bend on our integrity, then we're bending way out of here. Like we're not staying with you anymore. And that's an advantage. So in this case, I was asked to really sit with her and be that support. But I remember reading everything from start to finish, and it is like it was traumatic as the person reading it. And I remember like the heart palpitations, and I went into adrenaline mode where you're there to help and you're the solution finder, and we're going to go through all the steps, and we got legal involved, et cetera, et cetera. That all happened, and that was easy. And then I remembered sitting there afterwards, and like I had to have my own little cry, listening, like reading the story. And actually I also heard from her. I mean, it was just over Zoom, but I also heard from her, and I remember just going, this is awful.
Mm-hmm.
That this happens, like that's the other side, that and you hear about them in the peripheral. You always, it's the worst case situation. We always teach it. It's the worst case situation. And so for me, I reached out right away. And we actually work with another organization called CASA, which is the Community Calgary Association Against Sexual Abuse. And I asked what to do there. Like, what did they do? Because they're listening to similar stories all day long. And they certainly, come from the position of belief, whether there's evidence or not. They start with the position of belief. And she said, that's just it. You got to talk. You can't just keep layering things on top of it over and over again. And it was amazing, because as I was talking, I realized I was letting go all of the anxiety and that weirdness that was attached to it, as if it was my secret. So I highly, even though we are the trained professionals, we're the ones that are here to, and I don't know some stories, Saira, and I certainly don't want you to disclose anything you're uncomfortable with, but there are those stories that we've seen that we really wish we could unsee. Was that true for you as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, some of the stories that people tell you are truly horrific, right? And it is hard work. And that's sometimes why I do take breaks in between investigations, because I do need to reset, and I need to recover, and I need to breathe a little bit. I need to breathe my own air for a little bit. And I think Even when I'm doing investigations, I've had people say that people who have been accused, whether, whatever the findings are, I've had people say that, they're having suicidal thoughts, or, that they've engaged in some form of self-harm. And my mode of operation in those situations are always, I'm pausing the interview. It's a duty of care. What supports do you have in place? Are you okay? Like, how much of this can I go to your employer? Like, do you have an employee assistance plan? I usually know if they have an employee assistance plan. I ask about, like, do they have access to a good doctor that can refer them? And I don't care if the investigation gets sidetracked, because, and I don't care if they've done whatever they've been accused of doing at that point in time. Human to human, we have to care about these people, and I need to make sure that they've got the supports in place so that they are okay. And sometimes I'm the connector of services. Sometimes I will say, do you give me permission to go back to the key stakeholder and say that we need to arrange for some supports, because you're struggling and I need to make sure that you're cared for.
Right. Yeah. One of the things too that a psychologist that I was talking to as well, though, because again, there were same thing. The complainant had reported suicidal thoughts, but had said that they had already reached out to the suicide hotline, had also reached out to their doctor. And she said, did that weird you out that she told you this? And I said, absolutely. Like, that's my concern, is that she's reaching out to these people. And she said, you need to reverse that. You actually need to think it's amazing that she's reaching out to the people, so she's aware of what her supports are and she's doing the right things. It's the people that don't say anything, that don't know how to access anything, that feel like they're caught in their little bubble. Those are the people that you have to pay attention to. And that's where, as your point, Saira, is asking the questions. Do you know how to get a hold of EAP? Do you have people in your life that can support you right now? That is exactly the duty of care, is so incredibly important. And that's what I see a lot of people missing in the investigation too, is I've actually been told, and one that I was redoing was, nobody told me I had access to this.
Yes.
That's usually the number one. And typically it's the respondent that's really, can be struggling just as much as the complainant. So making sure you're saying that to both sides was so incredibly important.
And, I've had witnesses who have witnessed an event that was, they have a lot of guilt that they didn't step in and help, or say that's not okay, or, I don't think that's appropriate with what you said. So I have a lot of witnesses that I interview as part of the investigation process who are like, yes, I was there. Yes, I saw it. Yes, I knew it was wrong. And yes, I did absolutely nothing. And it's, that bystander guilt. And sometimes people really struggle. Like, if I had just said something, maybe things would have turned out differently, And so it's important to offer everybody those supports. I think one of the most powerful questions that I ask in every investigation is, what impact has this situation had on you? And you ask it of the complainant, the respondent, key witnesses, and that's where all of this stuff kind of comes out. And sometimes it falls out, right, in alarming ways, but it is important. It's important to understand how this situation has impacted people, and what impact this has had on someone's, not just work life, but their actual life.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
What do you think of cancel culture? I mean, I think this summer you and I were talking too.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I can't remember if it was your case or if it was my case, but I know we were talking about it. And you did say to me, you said, Michelle, if something's rotten in Denmark or something smells, and I know you used it more eloquently than I can say, but you were like, you got to follow the smell, essentially, like figure it out. And I don't disagree with that. But in a lot of organizations that we do tend to go into, it is wrought with gossip and toxicity. And the truth is, sometimes when somebody says something, there's a seed now that is planted, and it is hard to unseed that seed. And cancel culture takes that to a whole new level, like especially when you can't defend yourself, when it's done anonymously, when it's put out there in this completely open forum. Like anyone can be called a racist, anyone can be called, and where is this coming from? And yet there's great debate as to whether or not this is actually moving a few things forward. I mean, we have seen organizations shift and change because of cancel culture. So where do you sit? What where do you?
So I remember this conversation, and what I said was, if something's rotten in the state of Denmark, then you have to follow the smell. And what I meant by that was, as I said already, employers have a significant duty and obligation to create a healthy and safe environment. And sometimes we don't get a complaint, right? So it's not a workplace investigation. But if there is a sense that something is going on in an organization or in a department or in a team, employers have a duty and an obligation to react and to act. And so sometimes people will come to me and say, well, there's been no complaint, so we can't do an investigation. And I always say to them, right, we can't do an investigation, but we can do a workplace assessment. And we can go into that specific team and we can ask questions and we can understand what some of the core issues are. And we won't promise that there won't be an investigation, because oftentimes what happens is there's workplace assessment that's done, a particular issue or theme comes to light that is obviously a problem and needs to be investigated. And so sometimes a workplace assessment is the precursor to a workplace investigation, or sometimes you gather enough information through a workplace assessment that you understand that there is a problem that needs to be looked at in closer detail. As far as cancel culture is concerned, I think it comes down to, like for me, I don't have the same experience as you, for example. I don't go into companies and I don't necessarily know some of the players, right? So I don't have the same experience of, I don't have that same experience of if a seed is planted or anything like that. But I will say that with cancel culture, I think that it comes down to, we talk about it a lot, intention versus impact. Accountability is huge. I just wrote a blog about this last week, or maybe it was the week before. If someone says that if someone says that you offended them, you have to take what they're saying at face value.
Sure.
And you have to figure out what you said, why you said it, what you meant. And you have to figure out if there's a way for you to apologize, take responsibility, change your behavior, and mean it. Because, intent doesn't really matter when you've had a negative impact.
Right. No, I that I agree with. It's still, yeah, I'm on the fence. Actually, and we haven't really talked about this, but I know you saw it. So I was excited. I was advertising this exact event, as I always do. Typically I do it on LinkedIn as well, where I advertise it. And we had someone come on and make a comment, like a pretty awful comment again, I think anyways, around the fact that you and I were making money off of doing investigations and basically like what drivel and now that we're corporate police. We're corporate police now, things like that. And I thought it just blew my mind that somebody like that, but I mean, trolls are trolls, whatever, that would even respond to that. But even that in itself is like this negative perception still of investigations. I don't think they're negative. I mean, they're hard and they can be costly. They can be. The fastest one I've ever done is 2 weeks, and the longest one has lasted 6 months to 9 months. I don't know, what's your experience like in something like that?
Shortest one I've ever done was like from the moment I met the people to filing the report was 7 days, and that I didn't sleep that week.
Right.
And the longest one I've had to do, I think, was about 4 or 5 months, and some of that was based on availability. It was over the summer, people were not available. So I mean, and there can be complexities. I think also, like, I did an investigation in 2020 where there was 38 allegations filed. When you have 38 allegations filed, you don't just get to like say, I'm going to pick the top 10. You have to
Right.
investigate the top, like the 38 allegations that are filed, right?
Right.
And so it's a big process. So it can take months. And I agree that that person who made that comment, it doesn't come from a place of understanding. I think that came from a place of ignorance. I think the work that we do is really important. It is a form of support for organizations. It's important work. And, you know,
And what was okay? I mean, this comes back to the blog that you so eloquently wrote, what was okay maybe 20 or 30, and let's face it, it was never okay what was tolerated 10 years ago, for goodness sake, versus what's tolerated today, and our understanding and our knowing and our honestly our evolution as human beings.
yeah.
I'm glad to see that people are using their voice now. I really am, and I encourage people to use their voice. I don't know if it always, I think some people feel that they have to go straight to investigation all the time, and they're forgetting that there's this really great there's other opportunities, because a truly respectful work environment means that we can have conversations before it has to head to that investigation. But again, you have to have the right support systems. You have to trust the process.
And you have to react in those moments. You have to react the right way.
Yeah.
And you have to do the work that comes afterwards. If you say sorry and then you do the same thing the next day,
yeah,
you haven't fixed a problem. And,
no.
That it's not going to magically go away. So I agree, the world is different and it will continue to be different. And there's a lot of work that can be done before it gets to an investigation. But understand that when someone comes to you and, says, I have to tell you something, it's really hard for me,
Mm-hmm.
You have to listen with that open heart, open mind, and be prepared to accept the accountability for what you said or did that made that person feel that way. Because otherwise, if it's all about your defensive approach and your excuses and, Mercury's in retrograde, that's why this happened. You're not going to build trust. You're not going to build the relationship. And you will find yourself in a situation where you're on the receiving end of a complaint, a workplace investigation.
Yeah. Okay. We've got 6 minutes left. So I want to,
Okay.
I know, and we are like, I could keep doing this all afternoon because there's like multiple other questions that I would love to ask you. But anyways, I do want to allow for everyone else, if anyone else has a question, would like to, to pose to her. So you can use the Q&A. This is the easiest. It's in that you just kind of scroll up, you'll see the Q&A. Questions can either just be, they can be sent to both of us, they can be sent to one of us as anonymous. It can be directed to Saira or I. So if anyone has any questions. Okay, so I'll I will read them out loud and then we can answer live, okay? And then all the live answers, well, just because some people aren't reading them. So then all the live answers are going to be moved to answered. Also, because we send this link out, I don't think the Q&A works the same way. So that's the other side of this. Okay, so we got a question. While interpersonal conversations are on the rise, Me Too and Black Lives Matter movements, the rate at which employees report incidents of assault, harassment, and discrimination continues to remain low. In your experience, how can employers help employees feel safe reporting abuse and in discrimination?
So how can an employer create a safe environment for people to come and have those conversations? And so I really, I think some of it comes down to doing the right thing, right? So creating an environment, I think it's important for managers and to have relationships with their staff where they are asking them about like how they're feeling, how the work environment is, what could we be doing to improve it. I think we need to be asking proactive questions to try and elicit some of this information. I think the other important thing is, in order to create an environment where people feel safe to come forward, is they're watching very carefully how you're handling situations. So if a manager says like, oh, how did that meeting go? And they say, well, I really felt shut down by, X, Y, and Z on the team. the manager, if they say, oh, well, you just kind of have to, have a tougher spine about it, they were just giving you constructive feedback, that person feels dismissed. And so I think that the important thing is to make sure that you're digging a little bit deeper, that you're trying to understand how and why that person felt shut down. How could they have shared that information in a different way that wouldn't have elicited the same reaction in that person? I think it's about seeking to understand and then making sure that if things do need to be addressed, even if they're minor, I think that it's important to address them. I think it's important to take it seriously. I think it's important that when there is an actual bigger allegation, that we act swiftly, that we take it seriously, that we act swiftly, that we appoint someone qualified internal, or we find someone external and we get to the bottom of it. And the investigation process does not end when the report is filed. The investigation process does not end for some time. It's called workplace restoration. And if two people have gone through an investigation process, there is trust and relationships that need to be rebuilt. They need to figure out how to communicate with each other if they're going to continue to work on the same team in the same company. And the organization needs to have those levers and supports in place. It just doesn't end when the report gets filed. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to help these people feel comfortable in the workplace, to reset it, to figure out how they can communicate with each other. And both sides require supports.
Yeah. Safety, feeling safe is all about vulnerability and trust. And it starts with leadership. One of on my team, Rebecca, constantly says the lead dog sets the pace. It's usually because that's her advice to me when I'm not showing up fully. But anyways, that's for a different story. So when it comes to this, is you have to create environments where we can talk about it, where you're actually asking team members, are you feeling safe? And if not, creating safe spaces, even just to have that conversation before an investigation is even required sometimes as well. Yeah. And creating so we've actually seen diversity, equity, and inclusion committees take on a bigger piece of this too, that safety, because safety is about bringing your whole self to work and feeling like a sense of belonging. But what they don't necessarily have is training on how to support and help and encourage people to move forward. Because remember, a complaint, most of the time, and I've thought the same things too, is you make a complaint like this, if the evidence isn't there, and I've seen this where the evidence isn't there, it might be a feeling, like, again, you do this often, you give the +1, you explained it so eloquently to me, like if it's 50-50, I'm going to figure out who gets the 49 and who gets the 51, right? Like in trying to figure that out. But giving them a space, providing training, even to those support systems, and then being transparent and communicative. Like, we do want people to feel safe. That needs to exist too. And that, I still feel like we are sweeping a lot of that under the rug. We're just hoping that it doesn't happen. We've got our nice little workplace respect policy. Yep, we do our check off the box once a year, create this work, nice little thing for it too. It's got to go beyond that. It's just like the conversations around racism and discrimination. It's got to go beyond performative. If you want to create an environment where people truly do feel safe, it's got to be all the proactive things you can do in advance. And when that's not there, or organizations don't place as big of an importance on it, that's where we see that's the reason why people aren't bringing in incidents forward. But it's traumatic, it's embarrassing. I know one of the complainants told me, I don't want to have to repeat my story over and over again. I can't. Or in another way, I haven't even told my husband this, or I haven't told my spouse this, how can I tell you this,
Yeah.
And it's gut-wrenching sometimes. So I get why incidents remain at an all-time low.
Yeah. And I think managers also have to get comfortable with telling situations where they haven't felt safe and how they addressed it, or how they got supports to address it. Because if you can connect with someone on that level, and there's more of an impetus to say, oh, you've experienced this too, here's what I'm kind of experiencing now.
Someone asks, is Saira a CRST or a CRSP?
Pardon me?
Looks like it's asking around your license, a CRST or a CRSP as in Paul.
Like I'm licensed through like the Alberta Solicitor General, and it's the Security Services and Information, like that, it's SSIA. So I don't have, like, I don't even have my license right here, so I can't look at it, but I don't think I have any of those letters.
Oh, she's asking Canadian Registered Safety Technician.
No, I am not, no, and not either of those things. Sorry about that.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Next question is, how has the investigation process changed during the pandemic?
It's interesting. I think for the like, so before, when I used to do investigations, there was always this like need that the investigation needed to be done in person. It was the only way to build credibility. It was the only way to get to the truth of the matter. It was the only way to make people feel comfortable. And so I was really limited, right? Like I could only really do investigations in Alberta because nobody wants to pay for someone to travel to Ontario. But the pandemic really shifted things, and it forced us all to confront some of these, well, we can't do it that way. Well, we can if we have to, and it can be equally as effective. And in fact, it can be cheaper. Yeah. So, I mean, the pandemic has opened up so much opportunity for me as an investigator. I've done investigations many in Ontario, a couple of in BC, many in Alberta. I've been able to open up the realm of where I am able to conduct investigations. So that, there's been that. And I don't actually see that the world, once it resets itself on its axis and, things go back to some sort of pre-pandemic normal, I don't anticipate that I'm going to do every investigation in person. Yeah. I don't think that it has made me any less effective in building rapport in a relationship or coming to factual findings and conclusions. I think, it's a nice way for people to be able to sometimes participate in an investigation at home, where without prying eyes, where they can be comfortable in their own environment. And I just think it's changed the landscape a lot. We've all had to confront well, we can't do it this way. Well, we can, and we have been, and it's been really crazy effective.
Yeah. I have found it to be just as good myself. If I'm being completely honest, I actually sometimes feel safer too. Some days, depending on what I'm talking about, who I'm talking about, there's a barrier now that keeps, so that's one more emotional element that I don't need to be thinking about right now, especially in the cases of physical assault, etc., where we've seen that happen. And exactly that, how fast it can occur by being on Zoom, that has totally, I think, changed it. Zoom or whatever tool has changed it for being good. And of course, I do want to say this. I don't want to talk about like how expensive investigations are or how cheap they can be. But the truth is, it's the number one thing that we are asked, what we're asked, how much is this going to cost? And that we can't tell you,
Because you don't know until you dig into it.
Yeah.
And you have to be thorough.
Yeah.
In order to come to the right conclusion. I can never tell if I'm going to get 2 pages of evidence or, I did an investigation last year where I think I said I had 38 allegations. I got over 250 pages of text correspondence between 2 parties that I needed to comb through. Yeah. And all of it is relevant. And you don't know if it's relevant until you go through it.
Because it's a puzzle. And you got to put the pieces together. Yeah.
And it's important to do it well. It's important to do it right. It's important to be timely, but not rush it so you're skipping over pieces or, that's the other thing. With the pandemic and being able to do things on Zoom, I often will get an investigation like that will come in and they'll say, okay, can you meet with the complainant today? And the answer is no. This is the part that we screw up all the time. If we act too quickly and we jump right to the interview phase, we haven't reviewed the policies. We haven't made sure that the respondent knows the allegations against them fully, clearly, articulated, like completely. We haven't given
space.
We haven't offered supports. We haven't given them enough time to prepare and arrange for those supports. That's where the most mistakes happen, is if you don't take the time to plan an investigation. And I'm like big on planning. I like to read policies so I can follow them and understand them, or say, oh, your policy doesn't actually follow best practice, and I'm going to make a note of that because I'm going to recommend that you change it
Sure.
in the future. But I do think that, like, that's the thing, is a lot of people will be like, okay, so this person's available today. I'm not available today. Even if I'm really available today, I'm not available today.
And really what you have to do as an employer is show the motion that it is moving forward, that it is being taken seriously. And there are all these other steps you can do to demonstrate that as well.
And like, I will touch base with the, let's say, the complainant, and I will say, here are the next steps in the process. Here's where I'm in the process of reviewing documents, your complaint. I anticipate that I'm going to be in a position to meet with you, in 1 day from now or 2 days from now. I want you to know that you have the time, and here's who can be your support person should you wish to. All of those things, you can still make a connection and help them introduce yourself and say, here's who I am, here's how you can reach me, here are the things you can reach me about. Like, all of those things, you can certainly do them, but I'm not going to get into, okay, tell me about what happened on March 15th, 2019.
Yeah, no, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, what should happen at the end of a workplace harassment complaint?
So at the end of a workplace harassment complaint, so normally if there's an investigation, there will be a finding of whether harassment occurred or it didn't. There should be some potential recommendations that come out of the process and some learnings. Absolutely, whether your policy says it's verbally, in writing, or whatever, both parties, the complainant and the respondent, or if there's multiple parties, complainants, respondents, they need to be told the outcome of the investigation.
They don't get to read the report full in its
No, and
entirety.
I have been asked to provide like a one-pager that summarizes, here's the essence of the complaint, here's why we found that there was harassment or why we didn't find that there was harassment. I've been asked to create a one-pager that they can hand over to the participants, and that's fine. And they do not have the ability, and they shouldn't have the ability, to read the full report.
Yeah.
Just because there could be confidential information in there that they shouldn't have privy and access to. And then the real work begins, right? Because if there's been a finding of harassment and there's a decision that both employees are going to remain in the organization, then they have to figure out, the organization has to figure out all the steps that they're going to take to help these employees continue to work together.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the workplace restoration piece. And that's the piece that sometimes people will say, well, we'll just terminate the person and then we won't have to do that. You still, even if you terminate that person, you still have to make sure that the complainant feels safe and that they are able to move forward. And you still have to offer those supports.
And I agree that the complainant feels safe. And then there's something there for the respondent too that I'm a big fan of anyways, is that termination for me is not always the space that I want to go to. It certainly is a remedy, don't get me wrong, and especially based on the type or how big of the offense it is. But I do
Or how they've reacted in the moment. Have they taken accountability for it? Have they expressed remorse?
Yeah. Like coming back to Julie with the government as well. I mean, there could have been different ways she approached it. There could have been different ways. But again, it was pretty evident that that's just not who she was. She wasn't going to own any of it. And so in a way, it was almost easier for her to walk away. Right. And to say she resigned and all that hoopla. On the flip side of that, though, I am also a big fan of education. And in this day and age where we're all recognizing that we are on a journey of learning and unlearning, and recognizing how much, I didn't intend for you to be hurt. It doesn't matter if that wasn't your intention. What that impact is now, if we can get to a space of education and real education, like, yes, we've done that at the end of an investigation on racism. We've had people come in and support that, and it's not just a one-day class either, or a one-day course. But there are remedies beyond termination, and we've actually even turned some people that are respondents and they've been found guilty of the act, we've turned them into ambassadors,
Mhm.
they're training now others there. And I know that seems wild, but that's like best case scenario, but it's recognizing you don't have to go straight to termination. Again, it's dependent on what it is, don't get me wrong, but all right. And okay, Saira, this is more just a love on for you. But thank you for your valuable and vulnerable insight. Your knowledge, intelligence, and transparency create a strong sense of support and safety in these chaotic times.
Ah, that's so nice.
And this is another question. Are you seeing an increase in intolerance in the workplace, COVID fatigue?
You know, I am finding that with COVID and the fact that most people are, a lot of people in a lot of different industries are still working remotely. So I am finding that I am getting different types of complaints, right? So people will be on a one-on-one meeting and it's not immediately visible how one person is talking to the other because other attendees aren't there and overhearing it in a meeting environment. I do think that this pandemic has been tough for so many different people and it has affected so many different like parts of people's lives. I don't think that people are able to let things, let's say, roll off them as easily. It's just one more thing. If they're experiencing, if they're feeling belittled at work, they're not able to just let it roll off saying, oh, so and so is having a bad day, because it's layered on top of everything else that's going on in this world. And and I don't think anyone should have to tolerate disrespect at work, but I am finding that there is more investigations around things that are just coming up even by way of a virtual nature, or people are communicating in a way over chat that they've never had to communicate over chat in that way before. And they're really like, I understand, business on the top, pajamas on the bottom, but that doesn't mean that you can like sway your rules about chat. And like, it doesn't mean that the etiquette and the rules of conversation or respect have changed. And so I do find that there is a bit more of a slippery slope on that way. And that is sort of what I am finding.
Yeah, I would say it's the same reason why we spend so much more time teaching about microaggressions and how that microaggressions can lead to that psychological harassment. We're seeing a lot of that. And I think that, quote unquote, again, pre-pandemic, what people used to get away with in terms of, again, those microaggressions or even gaslighting, like, or
Yep.
forms of gaslighting, I suppose, that certainly people need to recognize and have a stronger ownership and a consciousness about what they say and do does impact others. Again, it comes back to that. But I think on the flip side, we also are teaching how I need to have ownership as well. So if I don't like something, or if I see something that I'm not comfortable with, I deserve a great workplace, and I deserve to voice that before it needs to get to a higher level. We need to teach people how to have better conflict and how to have conversations and how to create better relationships. So I see that, but that's also having conversations around mental health right now. That needs to happen too, because I think all of that is exacerbating what it is today.
And workplace, the feeling of workplace culture or an environment, it isn't just something that you walk into. It's something that is cultivated over time through actions, inactions, what's said, what's not said. And every single person contributes to shaping that environment. And so each person has an accountability in addressing issues in that environment. And I understand that it is not easy to do. And I'm not going to sit here and say, it's easy to do. It is the hardest stuff to do. But where we have to be showing and where our leadership in organizations need to support employees in having those conversations, and in having those conversations themselves, like calling people out, so that you become more conditioned in the environment when someone calls you out, for you to sit and listen and understand and try and learn and grow from that, right? Like it can't just create a safe space for people to have conversations. You need to show them how to do it.
Yeah. Do you ever record your investigation meetings? If so, how and what do you do with the recordings? I know you and I have differences of opinion here, so I'm glad this question was asked.
So, okay, so I don't normally record investigations. And the reason I haven't done that in the past is I actually find people get their backs very much up, especially when I was doing investigations in person. They really did not like the idea. They were not comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And so I do think that people wonder, they ask, like, where is this going to be played? Who's going to hear everything? It becomes, can my lawyer have a copy? Can this have a copy? I don't record investigations. I have my own shorthand. I take copious notes. I have like books and books and books of notes. I have, more recently, I have been asked to record investigations. I understand where it becomes an issue where someone says, well, I don't think I said that. And, it becomes this battle of wills kind of thing. I think there's a place for it. I think sometimes it helps the situation and sometimes it hurts. I'm not completely opposed to it. If I was going to do an investigation where I was recording it, right now I'm not doing an advertisement and I'm not earning revenue in any way, shape, or form through affiliation, but I use Zoom. I find it's a reliable platform. It's easy to use for most people. There's a record function, just as it's
the chat function as well translates everything immediately too.
Yeah.
Which makes the report a whole lot easier as well from my perspective anyways. So as you can tell, I am the recorder.
Yeah.
And I can tell a quick story why too is we were accused of making something up once in an investigation. And I remember just being in that space of having no control and living again that he said, she said kind of environment. And I wasn't good with it. And I just thought, you know what, like I trust myself, but again, when you have emotions and things running and so on and so forth, maybe he didn't say it. Maybe I am making that up. And for me, it's this check and balance of what I said, how I said it. I know the same thing lawyers have asked right away, basically to see if they can have a copy of it as well. And I have asked for what purpose, and so that is something that I do have to think about. I know even when lawyers want to sit in on investigations, you kind of go, oh man,
I do.
Yeah, well, or you did at least once anyways with me going, they're just not going to let anyone answer anything. That's
right.
Yeah.
I mean, I do. Honestly, I'm so used to having lawyers sit in now.
Okay.
It's become very like normal, especially because a lot of times the referral comes from a lawyer. So I know that someone's going to sit on it.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the circumstances, but yeah, certainly I'm very used to it now.
Okay.
I think
it was the summer where you were just like, oh,
but it was more like we had already started the investigation process, and then the tone that came, like barreling, like, okay, so it's going to be a hard one. It's going to be a contentious one. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And what do you do with them? I hold on to them in their records. I hold on, I think, Saira, you said, I know we've still got reports, I think that we've kept now for 3 years in case someone comes back. How long do you keep stuff for?
Yeah, I keep things for a minimum of 3 years. But like, I've had to testify in arbitration settings before when I've done unionized ones. I've had to testify in a court of law before to explain the investigation process that I undertook, just to make sure that it was fair and it followed best practices and whatnot. So if I find that like sometimes these things take a while to come up in an arbitration or in a court of law. And so sometimes if I'm getting the feeling that it's going to go beyond 3 years, I'll keep it for 5.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And how should workplace harassment be determined? Should it be based on policy only?
No. I mean, it has to be based on, there's a lot of like adjudication that happens in the courts where they give really good indicators on what we should be considering when it comes to harassment. The policy is only as good as the policy. Law, what you've seen in other organizations, I think that there are some good criteria for harassment that we should consider. And I don't have the test in front of me, and I do like to refer to the test. I don't do anything from memory because it will fail me. But I do think there are a number of different things that you need to consider. And one of those things, again, is impact on people.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to get off of this call, but I've got an investigation coming up. So
yeah, I know. Okay. So real quick, you've created a foundations for
why don't you want me to say?
Yeah, what is it? Like, you've created something for organizations to use when they're setting up their investigations properly, right?
So I think earlier I mentioned how important the planning piece is, right? Like planning and investigation. So I basically set up a project plan because I like to be organized. And it's a project plan document that you can map out your investigation process. It helps you to stay on track to make sure you're doing things in the right order. And also, for example, like when I've had to testify in arbitrations or courts of law, where they've asked me like, okay, on what day did you meet with this person? I can look at my document and say, the first time I met with them was this day. The next time I met with them was this day. Why was like, and you can put other pieces of information, like why was there a 3-week delay? Well, the key witnesses were on vacation or were on a medical leave. So I've created this document. A lot of people say, why would you create this document? Don't you want people to use your services for investigations? And the truth is that I'm only one person and I can only do, 1 or 2 investigations at a time. That's kind of my capacity. Yeah. And I do take breaks in between investigations. So I'm more about, it's not just about me, it's about how can I set other HR professionals up for success in any way, shape, or form. And so I put together this planning document for HR professionals if they're running their own investigations to kind of work through it, and they can customize it to suit their own needs. But I have a little video that goes along with it, so I can just talk you through.
Well, we'll send out the link, but your website is hrology.ca. You can find that on there as well. Saira, it was a pleasure. I mean, we had over 75 attendees today. They well dropped off. We went way over, but again, we could probably have a part 2 of this conversation.
Yeah, I'm game anytime.
Yeah, okay. And for those of you still here, I do just want to say February 25th, we have Lars Schmidt as our guest live. So Lars Schmidt wrote a book, just brand new, Redefined HR. It's already so good. It has flown off the shelves. It has flown off the shelves. You can't even get it on Amazon. You can get on the wait list. But I'm so excited to have him. We're accommodating him a little bit because he's kind of a big deal. And so it'll be
Thank God I didn't have to follow him.
It'll be at 1 o'clock, February 25th. We'll, of course, send out more information about that. But thank you again for joining us today. We so appreciate it. And Saira, it was awesome. Good luck.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.